Welcome. I'm Jessica Tejan, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. All right, welcome back to our Evolving to Exceptional listeners. I know that it's been a minute since we've released an episode, but I am really excited to have this conversation with Luis Baez. He is a sales and revenue enablement strategist, which I love that title. There's so much packed into that, and I'm super interested to hear a little bit more about your story and how you got to and into the place that you are today and why you're passionate about what it is you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I appreciate this opportunity to just share my story, and I appreciate the space that you've created for me to show up as my whole self. I am someone who stumbled into a career in sales. I'm someone who's first generation, first in their family to do the college thing. So I wanted to be the doctor, I wanted to be the lawyer. It didn't really work out for me, and so I stumbled into business after a friend of mine said, you've got this like real capacity and capability for just like pulling people in, like really creating good vibes and helping people make good decisions. Like, I wonder if sales might be your thing. Fast forward to me moving from working in ad sales in New York City to working in tech in Silicon Valley, getting recruited to work at companies like LinkedIn, Google, Uber, Tesla. I've made over 600 million in revenue impact as an individual contributor. I've been a sales leader. And then I hit this sort of fork in the road. And a friend of mine said, she's Canadian and she loves figure skating. She's like, some figure skaters, like they just stop qualifying for certain events and they just, lead this other path and go into coaching the next Olympian. And that really sat with me. And so I leaned into enablement, sales enablement, revenue enablement, really as a way of making the highest contribution that I possibly could, using, the gifts that I was given and the things that I've developed over time.
I love that story, and I love the idea. Well, first of all, I have to say, I as somebody who went to law school and became a lawyer, it's not all it's cracked up to be. So I think your journey sounds a whole lot more fun
Fun fact,
than at
I'm a
least
law school dropout.
yeah, at least the start of mine. But I love how you tell that as an opportunity to move from like that doing to that supporting role and
Yeah.
to maybe be able to impact more people and have a more expanded influence on individuals.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's been a very like informal kind of, I don't have any formal certification or training in anything that I've done really over the last 17 years of my career, but faked it till I made it, read all the books, asked for all the advice, listened to all the podcasts, right? And we made it happen.
So what is it that makes you really passionate about sales? What is it you like love about it, and what is it that maybe drives you to work with individuals to make this type of impact?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I feel like what really drew me to sales was this ability to just really be in the driver's seat of where I'm headed. Right. I step into a company, there's a product to be sold, there's tools and collateral and things to help facilitate conversations with customers. And the rest is on me. And I can, make as much as I want to make, right? There's a base salary. Yes, there's bonus equity. We can talk about all the way that like packages are put together in different industries. But at the end of the day, right, working in sales is about driving commissions and having sort of an untapped potential for making as much commission as you possibly want to or can. And so I was, really driven to, there's this part of me that just loves like being in control of my own destiny, building things for myself. I've always had this like entrepreneurial spirit, but I didn't recognize it until much later in my career. And I think that that's really what helped me in sales as an entrepreneur, being within a company and building a business within a company. And what really drives me to want to help other people is that I've seen the life-changing results of having a career in sales and being in that position to take care of family, pay off student debt, travel the world, right? I was at the Beyonce concert last summer. I didn't miss out, right? Like those are the things that matter to me. And I'm in a position to drive that, with the career that I've driven and with the skills that I've built along the way. And also, it came from a place of admiration, right? Like I look at like salespeople and the way they just kind of command a room and the way they tell stories and the way that they use both sides of their brains. And I wanted to be that person. And apparently I became that person.
So tell me, for those, because entrepreneurship is a term that, I mean, I think some people probably know, but a lot of people don't. Can you maybe describe that a little bit further and tell us a little bit about how you did that, or what was like maybe an example of doing that?
Yeah, great question. So, entrepreneurship is this concept that within a company, if you create the right culture, introduce the right tools and processes and systems and incentives, you can start to drive this culture of self motivated people that act like stakeholders and owners within the business, right? And so they don't sit around and wait for permission, they get things done. They don't sit around and wait for things to be handed to them. They go grab and seize the opportunity. That's something that was always sort of within me. I'm an Aries, I'm a New Yorker. There's a lot of fire going on in this belly, right? And so when I stepped into Silicon Valley, walking away from ad sales in New York and that sort of toxic culture that it used to be, maybe still is, I don't know. I stepped into a culture where there was this real regard for human potential and human capital. If we create an environment where you can contribute at your highest and show up at your best, we're going to get the best out of you. We're going to see the results as a company, and the culture will continue to perpetuate and thrive. And that's where being at companies like LinkedIn and Google in particular, they have very strong cultures around entrepreneurship. That's where I had that first taste of like, I'm stepping into a company, I'm getting a salary, I'm also getting equity. So I'm technically an owner in this business, right? And all around me, all the processes, systems, and tools are set up. So it's all very self serve. I'm not sitting around and asking for permission. I'm getting things done and teaching as I go.
I love that. And you know what's interesting is I actually never thought of myself as an entrepreneur until you just described it in that way, and realizing like I spent many years inside an organization that had a really great culture and was able to build, essentially like a performance culture approach to people.
Mhm.
And then now obviously I do it outside of that organization, but that's so interesting to think about. And I'm curious, like, what was it about that culture maybe versus the versus the cultures that you experienced in New York?
Mhm.
Compare and contrast some of the things that maybe made the New York cultures toxic versus what you experienced where you were able to like kind of grow and flourish in those ways.
Yeah, I think part of it was there was this real fear-based leadership, examples of fear-based leadership that I experienced working in ad sales in New York in the early 2000s. Um, and I am an out gay man, and I bring my whole self into the boardroom, and I wasn't welcomed. I was actually put down several times over and made to be, feel unsafe in the workplace. And even when I spoke up and spoke out against everything that was happening to me, I still wasn't rightfully and diligently protected. There was this promise, of moving over to Silicon Valley and jumping into that industry and jumping into companies and cultures that actually wanted me there. They wanted my perspective around product design, customer experience, user experience. They wanted someone like me connecting with customers across the board, boardroom, that otherwise might not lean into the conversation because they didn't feel safe or they didn't feel seen, in the entire, way that they were doing business. And so I leaned into that promise and I showed up in California, no job, no car, a handful of contacts. And a couple of months later, I was recruited on to work at LinkedIn after spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. Someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, you seem to like understand how to use this platform. Why don't you come work for us and teach other people how to use LinkedIn? I think that would help us all." And that was the beginning of that entire uplift in my career and experiencing these less toxic cultures, and experiencing what it felt to like have a path created for me and to have systems of support, things like employee resource groups, surveys, and things that I could lean on, right? Office hours, mentorship, and things like that that I hadn't experienced in other industries.
First of all, I just want to honor you for sharing that. That is, um not an insignificant experience to have to endure and go through and have to navigate, and the challenges. And I always talk about things from a like a neuroscience lens. And when you're in that type of environment that doesn't allow you to show up as your whole self or punishes you and creates fear for doing so, you almost operate in a pure survival state. Your body's almost constantly in that state, and that makes it really hard to learn, to grow, to expand, to be fully present, to really have the experiences that you want to be having as you're living your life and as you're on that journey. And the courage that it must have taken to overcome the fear of relocating and starting over to get that opportunity to get to do something that and exist in an environment. I think we underestimate how big of an impact existing
Mm,
in an environment that is negative about who we are
yeah,
has on us as individuals.
yeah,
And although it can contribute to growth and learning and all of those things on the other end, it really has an impact on our lives and what we're experiencing.
yeah, it does. And thank you so much for saying that. And I want to honor anyone that's listening and kind of nodding their head or having like shared an experience or feel like what we're saying is resonating with them. The best that I can say is like lean into your people, right? Receive all the love that you can from family, from your network. Lean into therapy if you have access, if you have healthcare and things like that. That certainly helps, and exercise. I mean, there's so much that can happen from connecting with your breath and connecting with your body and just unplugging from the matrix for a bit.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I would add to that that one of the things that happens is that when we're stressed, that stress energy builds up in our bodies, and because we're not actually outrunning predators or trying to fight them off, that predator, we have to just let them exist. We don't ever expend that stress in our bodies. We're not running away, or we're not. And so if you can exercise or you can do breath, or there's other things you can do in terms of movement with your body to get that stress out of your body, that
Yeah,
can make such a huge impact. So I want to second your comment there, that there's a lot of science to support that is incredibly valuable
yeah,
advice.
yeah. No, thank you, my friend.
So tell me a little bit about what you do now today. How do you work with individuals as this sales enablement strategist? What is it that you do? How do you support those that you're working with, and what's your objective for them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are a few people that I help and that I'm available to. I'm certainly available to those individuals that either are building their own business or are entrepreneurs building a book of business within another company, and need that leadership and sales coaching and strategy. Maybe they're working on a big deal, they're hitting roadblocks, they're afraid of losing out on the opportunity, and they need someone in their corner helping them sort of strategize the approach, the communications, and the way to position and price things. So I certainly help in, and help with that sort of deal coaching. Um, I also work with leaders who lead sales teams and are really looking to elevate sales performance by shifting the culture and implementing the right systems and coaching and tools, to support and sustain that kind of performance. And so I'll step into working with a team, establishing playbooks, implementing the tools, to help elevate the way they connect with customers, and then even thinking about implementing onboarding and training and certification programs to make things sustainable and scalable as the team grows. And then, of course, the last piece is around learning and instruction design, right? So I also step into organizations, and I will create online programs and individualized learning experiences, to help people cement their skills and their confidence in sales and in leadership. And I do that within my own business, sort of working one on one with businesses and individuals. I also work with a publisher and I distribute content across LinkedIn Learning. So that's my other way of sort of expanding my influence.
So how did you get into that? How did you get into publishing content and working with LinkedIn and doing that type of training work?
Yeah, entirely serendipitous. So I am someone who at this point has spoken on over 40 business and leadership podcasts, and I talk extensively about leadership, entrepreneurship, sales culture, inclusion in sales teams, and things of that nature. And in promoting that content across LinkedIn, the CEO of a publisher reached out to me and said, we really like your content. We'd love to have a conversation about you joining our team as an author. And the opportunity to distribute content. And so had the conversation, developed the first program. It was successful. I was author of the year that year, or one of our top performing authors. And then I was invited back to develop additional programs for them. So continuing to build on that library of content.
Oh, that's so interesting and so fascinating how things can kind of come together like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why everyone tells you like keep going. You never know how like the path will unfold. Everything that you need will like appear along the way, etc. It's always in the retrospect that it's like, yeah, if I hadn't done this, or if I'd given up, or if I threw in the towel, whatever, right? Like, and I try to remind myself of that in moments where things like when I look ahead and if things look nebulous, it's like it's gonna work. It's always worked out. Yeah, you never know when it's coming, but there's always like the solution. So just keep walking.
So I'm curious because you talked about kind of two very different, maybe um, types of clients or customers, right?
Mhm.
Organizations that maybe have whole sales teams that they're onboarding or they're training or they're wanting to scale up. And then
Yep.
you also talked about more of like the individual entrepreneur and working with them. Is there a
Yeah.
difference in terms of, your approach or your recommendations as you work with them, or maybe like what is the biggest, difference between those two?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I'm working with an individual, I typically home in on one deal and one desired outcome. Are we trying to nail the next meeting? Are we trying to close the deal? Are we trying to like get an introduction to the other gatekeeper? Right. So I typically step into a conversation with an individual and I'm assessing their confidence for sales. I'm looking at their process and trying to assess where are the potholes on your path, right? Where can I call out those things that you can't see? And then even thinking bigger picture, like, from the customer's perspective, what are they experiencing? What do they need to see, learn, or experience to have confidence making an investment with you, right? So let's fill in some
Mm.
of those gaps in whether it's content, tools, processes, or whatever that might be. So when I'm working with an individual, I'm assessing what's available to them and I'm helping them carve out a path and a plan to action to that desired outcome. And that's an individualized coaching session where I'm just focused on that person, their self concept and confidence. When I'm stepping into a business that's experiencing growth, they're hiring their first few salespeople, they're implementing, processes, they're trying to establish a sales culture. What I'm doing in that instance is I'm looking at everyone's performance and I'm calibrating where they are versus where the company wants them to be. And then I'm starting to fill in those gaps in looking at certification and training around skills, looking at what's going to be the right coaching model for the business that's quick and easy and will help sustain performance. And then capturing all of that in a way that makes it repeatable and reusable for the next salesperson, right? Because I will typically step out of that business and then that business will continue to grow. And so that's really the difference is that focus on individual performance versus that focus on like group performance. And I've had experience sort of on both ends and using both sides of my brains around that.
I think it's really interesting. And I think that's such a great suggestion too, to leave behind or to have a way for them to continue to use it so that it doesn't become, a one and done, type training event,
Yeah.
and maybe is able to live on beyond, your initial engagement with them.
Yeah.
What would you say is like your favorite um type of customer, your favorite type of engagement, and why is that?
I think I go against everyone loves an easy sale, an easy customer, a breezy conversation, someone who like knows what they want, is going to move very quickly through the process. Those kinds of deals and those experiences don't excite me because it's kind of transactional for me. It's like, okay, there's no intellectual rigor. But when someone's like, I don't believe you, don't buy into this, don't get it, There's a lot of resistance to change. That's when it's like, okay, game on. There are more neurons in my brain that become activated. And I love that aha moment where finally someone just kind of like lets their guard down and go, okay, I see you. I'm going to follow you down this path, right? That for me is affirming about my capacity to be someone that you can trust and to influence the way that you move through your business decisions. And that's why I'm in this game at the end of the day, is really to help people who are stuck get unstuck in their process.
I think that's super powerful because coming from an entrepreneur space myself, and I'm in a network of entrepreneurs who are wanting to make an impact in the world, and the sales conversation, the how to get into or attract the right clients, especially in that B2B space. It's a little different in the B2C space, but it can be the most difficult part for somebody who's just starting out and
Yeah,
having to figure that out for themselves.
yeah, yeah.
So
Certainly can be.
so tell me a little bit about you what you think is the most challenging part about B2B sales in particular.
The most challenging thing about B2B sales in the context of everything happening macroeconomically right now is that B2B sales processes are getting longer. These budgets are also shrinking. There's more energy and effort and content and things that are required, to get B2B deals closed in this macroeconomic climate. And I've experienced it across different industries, right? There are very few industries that are sort of booming right now. Everyone is taking a really hard look. There are, tons of statistics across Salesforce, HubSpot, Gong, and all these different sources that I feverishly consume. And they will tell you time and time again, right? When closing a deal, there are more people involved in the decision-making process in B2B sales, right? It used to be just maybe the director and maybe a VP kind of running with the budget and implementing things. Now we've got to bring in operations, we've got to bring in legal, we've got to bring in security. There needs to be a tighter business case for any investment being made in another tool or a process or solution, right? And so that's what's happening in B2B sales right now. It's that it requires people to be a lot more on court than they had to be maybe just a few years ago.
That's interesting. It's such an interesting observation, and it makes sense with the way the economy is and the timing to implement. What would you say? How has that B2B sale lengthened from what to what? And and then how do you help as you're coaching your clients? How do you help them to get to the right level within the organization that they're trying to sell into?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what used to be maybe a 30 to 60-day sales cycle, meaning within a month or two, someone's bought in, they've assessed a service or a product, they've gotten all the internal approvals, budget approved, they're ready to sign, they're ready to implement. That used to be the case. Now the process could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, because not only do we have to go through additional internal approvals, there might also need to be a trial period or a test period. Right now, there needs to be validation, demonstration of ROI, commitment. They need to gel with teams and see how everyone works together before they decide to actually get all the way in bed with another business, right? And so that's the way that things operate now. And so my job when I'm coaching someone is like, let's lay out the entire process end to end, right? Let's like look at what this deal requires, who's going to be involved in the decision making process, the approval process. Let's try to gauge what their timeline is, and let's try to anticipate what we're going to need when that moment approaches, right? If we're going to need, for example, a demo or a trial of a product or service, let's get our ducks in a row internally. Let's make sure that we drive and steer that conversation so that there's confidence that we're actually holding the business's hand through that entire process, right? And think about even beyond that, how do we measure and assess the success of that trial? Let's get our reporting in order. Let's get them to agree to what success looks like, right? And at the end of it, let's all come to the table and assess whether that was a fair, sort of trial. Those are some of the things that are in play now, right? And so when I'm coaching someone, it's like, Let's talk about the eventuality of the process, right? You're here. This is where you want to be. Let's trust that you're moving in that direction. Let's show up like we're already the best at what we do. Let's leave nothing to chance. Let's own all of the follow up, all of the process, all the way through. All right. And let's have compassion for people when they don't immediately get back to us. They're running a business in a crazy economy, right? They may not get back to that email right away. Don't dismiss it as like, oh, the deal is lost and I'm incompetent and this is all, going to hell. You just make sure you follow up and you follow through.
So I'm curious a little bit. What that was making me think about a little bit was the experience that you've had with individuals being able to adopt these practices, right? So you train on
Mhm.
these practices, you've used these practices as a salesperson yourself. What has been your experience with the ability of individuals to be able to adopt them, put them into practice, use them consistently? Is it easy to learn? Is it hard? Are there some people who just can't get it? Like what does that adoption rate look like?
That's a great question. Adoption is going to look like a couple of things. People learn in different modalities. Some people need to, like, let's say we're implementing a new tool, right? Or we're implementing a new process in Salesforce, right? There are some people who just like go in, click, 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 mess around, make a few mistakes. They learn from their mistakes, don't commit them again, on to the next. There are other people who like need to watch a demo video 2, 3 times before it all kind of clicks and sinks in, and they feel confident then dipping their toe and clicking around with, without that anxiety of making a mistake. And so you want to make sure that, like, as you're thinking about adoption, serve up those opportunities for people to learn however they need to learn, right? That's going to ensure the quickest adoption, of whatever process, tool, or whatever you're implementing. The other thing to consider is incentives, right? We work in sales because we like to get paid. We love a commission, we love a bonus, we love a president's club, we love a good shout out. Give me a plaque, give me a gift certificate, a bottle
Yeah.
of wine, a steak dinner. Let's go, right? So if you want me to behave a certain way, put some money behind that behavior somehow.
That's interesting. I There's conflicting, right, data around the incentivization of external versus intrinsic, and you talked about that a little bit earlier of when you can create that culture where people are, like, intrinsically motivated to, um, put their passion into and get it accomplished. What's been your kind of experience with, the balance between those and especially in the sales space, which has, like you said, is typically commissions driven. It
Yeah,
is very driven in terms of, you earn your keep as a salesperson. Either
yeah.
you sell it or you don't, and that makes up your a good portion of your salary. what
Yeah.
what is what is your perspective on that, or what's your experience with that?
There needs to be a balance, right? We just talked about like in personalized incentives around like individualized behavior change, right? When we're talking about establishing a culture around performance, a sort of like an entrepreneurship driven sales culture, there needs to be more than just a quick incentive. There needs to be like a real celebration of people's contributions. There also needs to be clarity around like what does performance and what does it look like to be a good rep, right? Like, what
Mhm.
does it mean to be successful here? I need to be able to assess whether I'm on the right path. I need to have affirmation that I've got the skills as I'm going along this journey, right? And developing those skills. And so let's talk about those training programs, certification programs. There are also opportunities for people to do peer coaching and mentoring, right? There are some people who love to just lead in that capacity. And if you allow for that, everyone, wins and benefits from that. And so there are beyond gifts and commissions, right? There are other ways to incentivize people to want to show up, want to work hard, and be part of a team.
So I'm curious what you've seen maybe in the either in your past, roles in sales itself as a sales leader, or in working with organizations. Is the challenge that either the sales leader or the sales teams themselves are encountering the most? Like, what is the thing that they are struggling with or challenged with the most
Mm.
right now?
Yeah. So when I listen to sales leaders, they'll complain about how their reps aren't doing things fast enough with the same urgency that they see things, etc. When you talk to reps, I'm not incentivized. People don't look when they don't pay attention when I do work hard. They only pay attention when I mess up or when I miss target. I need these tools to do this job. They don't listen to me when I ask for them, etc. So these are the things that I hear over and over in every organization when I'm stepping in and I'm doing a needs analysis and I'm looking at like, where do we start to move the needle? What I do before proposing any tool, any changes, anything that's super radical, the first thing that I'm going to focus on is implementing a coaching program. Let's look at coaching the leaders on being good coaches. I'll implement a very simple 4-part framework to help them focus on sales performance and being able to coach on the fly and on the spot. And once I've taken the sales leaders through their sort of certification around coaching and I've done some role play with them, et cetera, then I'm introducing coaching for the reps. They're getting individualized coaching from their leaders during their one-on-ones. We're also implementing group coaching opportunities so that people have visibility amongst themselves and sort of understanding like who is the subject matter expert across the business, across different products or processes, right? Because when you start to gel together as a team and you start to uncover all those treasures and all that sort of siloed knowledge, that's when you start to build that sort of energy and that culture around like, wow, we're doing things, we're humming along, right? Like we're creating some transparency and we're learning and we're being supported and we're getting feedback, right? I may not have the commission in hand, I may not have all the like tools and everything that I need, but at least I'm still learning and I'm being seen, heard, and understood. And that is the impact of a coaching program. And that's going to start to shift the culture way more than like a learning management tool or a revenue intelligence, solution.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because so often, and I love that, that's so smart, is that oftentimes organizations look for the technology or the tool first, like
Yeah.
this is going to fix it. But if the people themselves aren't interested in or motivated to make that successful, then it won't be successful. And it makes me like question a little bit, you know, because as you describe coaching, everybody kind of has their own like definition of coaching, and most leaders think they're doing that, or
Mm,
they think that they're doing the right things, or that
yeah.
they're, they've been through some sort of leader program somewhere along the way. What do you see as the gap there, that's kind of missing?
Yeah, it's a matter of teaching someone to fish versus giving them the fish. So I think that a lot of leaders they say, "Yeah, we're coaching. I'm coaching. I'm sitting with my people and we're problem solving and I'm giving them the things that they need." Cool. They're not going to learn how to solve a problem on their own, and they're not going to move as quickly as you need them to. As frustrated as you are, your people don't move fast enough. They're not going to move as quickly as they need to if they depend on you, right? If they need your permission, your approval, your validation, right, to get something, that is going to be an entire obstacle to a situation. So in coaching, what I encourage is really you're holding up the mirror and you're saying, great, you have this problem, you have this desired outcome. Let's lay out all the obstacles to getting that done. Let's look at all the options that you have. Do we need to pull in executive sponsors internally to start talking to customers? Do we need to talk to product about introducing a new, beta program? Do we need to, look at a trend? We're missing out on millions of dollars because this we keep coming up against this, right? Like, where do we go from here? And then validating for that rep their decision. That's a great decision. That plan sounds great. Are you going to be confident that you can execute this in the next 3 days? Right? Can you give me a verbal like you've got this? Right? That's how we start to shift that person's self concept, their capacity to make a decision, right? And their ability to stop asking for permission all the time.
I love what you just highlighted here, because this is my space. This is where I jam, which is that people there's these capacity constraints on people, and most organizations aren't necessarily aware of them. And there's kind of two elements to them. There's one, maybe I've got my own individual constraints, things like my own fears or my own limiting beliefs, or things that are keeping me stuck. And then there's also organizational constraints. So if I am not clear on what the expectation is, or I haven't committed to and bought into the goals that are set for me, then I'm capacity limited. I have to go to my manager. I have to go every time to get that information or get that feedback. And so I love what you just said about how that unlocks that capacity by not giving them the answer, but instead teaching them how to ask those questions, or ask the walk through those questions themselves, so they can see how they could get to the answer
Mm,
on their own. And
mm,
then really what's great about that is then they take ownership of it. Right now they've verbally committed to, and that's one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders make all the time, is that they write the goals for their teammates or their employees, and their employees never take ownership or commit to the goals. And so then when they don't get accomplished, they're like, well, how come it didn't get accomplished? Well, they weren't their goals, they were your goals. And there's that disconnect. So I think that's just a really smart strategy.
Thank you. Yeah, no, coaching is something that especially when you think about what's happening macroeconomically, it's hard to make a case for implementing tools without seeing some sort of performance, without experiencing some kind of change, right? And I think the best way to start moving the needle within an organization is implementing coaching.
Yeah, and it makes an impact. I mean, it's the fastest way to make an
Yeah,
impact, right? Because
yeah,
if you can unlock some of that capacity from those individuals, you can get them empowered, committed to the results, the expectations, the things that they need to get accomplished, and teach your leaders how important that feedback is.
yeah,
Which I think was another thing that you hit on that was super powerful, because so often leaders underestimate the power of the reinforcement or the
yeah,
acknowledgement. They think of it, of recognition, as like winning award or giving some type of big grandeur, you did an amazing job. But one of the things, and this kind of the neuroscience side of it, is the more that you're acknowledging what someone's done, the more you're strengthening that neural pathway in their neural networks. And
mm,
so every time you're seeing someone do something and you strengthen that connection, eventually that becomes just part of their ways of working and being. And you
yeah,
don't have to keep strengthening that connection anymore, and you can move on to the next thing. But we so often, don't take the time to do it. And then we're like, well, how come they're not doing what I want them to do? Well, they don't know that you're noticing, and that that's actually what you want them to be
yeah,
doing.
yeah. Exactly. And that's where that like visibility, validation, that's all really important when you're looking to shift the culture and you're going to be really focused on performance.
So what is the reaction from the sales leaders as you work with them? Are they surprised? Are they like, uh, I can't believe this is working? Are they resistant? Like what how do they take this process?
It's a lot of resistance at first. It's a lot of like, I've got to find ways to incentivize and motivate the leaders to adopt the frameworks that I'm trying to teach them and implement. I also have to validate for them, like, see, you tried it, it worked, right? Like, look at what your rep just did, right? Like, let's keep going down this path. It's working. I think that when we do a sort of like quarter over quarter look back and analysis, and we look at the numbers and we look at the qualitative feedback also from surveys and such, that's when they start to go, okay, I get it now. I see what you're doing. I'm going to lean into this now. Like let's do this coaching thing that you keep wanting to do, right? And for me, I lean into sharing anecdotally the things that I've experienced as a rep and as a leader when implementing these things, just to help guide like, does this work and will this work? And I often reflect on my very first meeting working at LinkedIn. It was my first tech job in California, in Silicon Valley. I'd made that transition from New York to the West. I'd worked in like these really toxic sort of cultures. And so I stepped into my first like sales meeting, like pipeline ready, notes ready. Like I'm here to be drilled and grilled. I know my numbers, I'm on top of it. And my director walks in. She was about 2 minutes late for her meeting. And she's someone that prior to working at LinkedIn was a leader at Google. And I really admired all the work that she'd done and the career that she built. And it's part of the reason I joined the company. And she walks in 2 minutes late, puts her laptop down on the table in the boardroom and apologizes to everyone. I'm so sorry. I'm running late. I came from another meeting. She plugs all her things in, projects on the screen. It's her calendar. Everything's color coded and it's all jammed. And she's like, I just want to let you all know, like, I haven't forgotten about the things that you've asked me for. I've got a meeting on this solution. I've got a meeting on that tool. I've got a meeting on this. This is coming on this day. I've got to travel on that day. I've got childcare that I've got to resolve for that day. It's like the most transparent and the most like human. Like, I am hustling for y'all as your leader. How are you hustling for me? Right. And it was for me, I felt like such a sense of relief, like, wow, like
Mm.
this is going to be a safe environment for me to like be human for a second, but also like to ask for real help and not feel like I'm going to be turned away. And I share that story with leaders, and I try to set a bar and a benchmark for them. This is who you could be. This is the kind of relief that your people could feel when you walk in the room if you
Mm.
allow yourself to show up this way.
I that is a beautiful story of such amazing vulnerability, right? Like
Yeah.
to reveal that to a whole team, to
Yeah.
open up in that way, be that level of transparent is and gosh, that must have, like you just said, it created such trust, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is how it's gonna be. Like
Yeah.
it's changed the whole tone.
Yeah. Changes everything. And it made me want to work harder. I'm like, that's someone I want to work hard for. Like, I'm gonna answer your emails late at night. I'm gonna answer your emails on weekends because I know that you respect me and you understand what we're all balancing here. Like, I am willing to show up for that kind of leader.
I think that's so interesting because so often I think leaders think it's the reverse. Like,
Mm.
I need to have your respect,
Yeah.
or, like you need to appreciate how important I am
Yeah. I'm
rather
working so hard for
than,
you in the background. You don't get it.
yeah, look, I'm here. I want to make this work. I want us to be successful together
Yeah.
and really like getting in there on the same, like level with the team. And it's interesting because I think so often there's this armor that leaders can have where they resist, you know, letting people see inside their own struggles or their own challenges, or maybe like the bigger picture that's
Yeah.
contributing to decisions or what's happening. And that just creates more anxiety for the whole team, right? Like, how come
Yeah.
we haven't heard back on this? What is going on with XYZ, right? And that just creates that unknown and then maybe triggers a fear response.
Yeah. Sure does. That sure does. And I think that fear held me back for so many years from just showing up and like shining and like really exhibiting like my full capacity at work. And I now I don't even think twice, about filtering any part of myself when I step into a meeting. And I think about the career that I've had stepping into, being a global revenue enablement leader at $1 billion company, and building an entire function globally. Like, you could not have told me that that was possible for me, a decade ago, 12 years ago, when I was still sitting in New York City in that cubicle, getting yelled at and being grilled and drilled. There was no one could have told me like, it's going to come true for you. It's going to happen.
Contrast, because I can only imagine, but contrast for us the difference between the amount of like energy capacity you felt like you had in that past environment compared to that global revenue, like where you had that trust and you had all of that excitement and opportunity to make a difference and you could show up as yourself. Like, how much did that change what you were able to accomplish and do?
I think it changed everything. I stopped questioning whether I was good enough, whether I belonged, whether I was smart enough, capable enough, right? That was no longer the question, right? I found an environment that saw me for me and celebrated it. So I leaned into that and I put it all on the table, and I walked away with the bonuses, the promotions, the accolades, let's go, right? And I think that all of that is the validation for me that I am showing up authentically and that there's alignment in every way that I move.
I it's so powerful, and I remember reflecting back in my own career, and I was in a pretty traditional workspace in the past, and there was not a lot of diversity. Let's put it that way. And I remember getting into conversations about why that was problematic and why if a person couldn't show up fully, if they couldn't actually talk about who they were dating, their significant other, if they didn't feel safe enough or comfortable enough to talk about their sexuality or who they are as a person, how that impacts their performance, and getting into conversations where, the contrary opinion was, well, it doesn't matter. They're just here to do work. Well, it doesn't matter. They don't need to talk about that. They don't, it doesn't matter if they
Mhm.
can't share that here. That's not a big deal. That shouldn't impact them. And the amount that that impacts people, I
Mhm.
think, is so um important to recognize that when we talk about creating those safe spaces that allow for diversity and inclusion and that sense of belonging and being seen, heard, and appreciated and respected, that it's not about the issue itself, but it's about how much a person is, like, negatively impacted by having to keep that secret or not share that piece of themselves or
Yeah.
not be able to, be their true self. And so you're busy thinking about, don't screw up, don't mention that, don't say the wrong thing, don't, instead of just focusing on the work, instead of just focusing on what you want to get done or accomplishing results. And
Mhm.
that's the last thing you really want to have in your organization, right?
Yeah. Definitely not. And as I'm listening to you, I'm reflecting on some experiences that I've had. I take my position as a leader very seriously, not just in doing my work and driving the numbers, but like really creating a space for everyone around me to thrive. And I am often turned to by people of color, queer people, and folks that are otherwise overlooked within an organization, and they have asides with me, and they're just like, I really appreciate the way that you show up because it gives me permission to do the same.
Mm.
I appreciate that you see me and that you call out my contributions when no one else has. I really appreciate that you saw that and that you made it a point to have everyone celebrate that. Because I again have that lens and that perspective and that experience of having been overlooked, and now it's like we're going to drive numbers and we're going to make sure we celebrate everyone's contribution.
Well, and it honors, I think, the beauty of the uniqueness of each human being.
Mm,
And I think sometimes, at least historically, organizations focus very much on getting the person, like the right person with the right things, that in the right ways into this right role.
yeah.
And I always like to look at it the other way. Instead of the right person in the right role, let's figure out the right person with the right goal. What is
Mhm.
it that how can we apply this unique, creative, amazing person in all of that uniqueness and capabilities that they have in a
Yeah.
way that creates the best results for them and for the organization. And that's like the difference between, showing up to the game and winning the game, is
Right.
what do you do with the players that you have?
Yep.
Because you don't always get to choose, the
Yep.
the most amazing team. And what pops into my head is there's the story of the A team, right? Who had all the best players in basketball were on this team, and then they didn't perform well together because they were all hot shots from their own teams and they
Yeah.
didn't work well as a team
Yeah.
together. And there's this story, about that experience, and it really makes a big impact, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It sure does. It sure does. And not only does it make an impact, but those things really influence and stay with you, right? So when you think about like, I always encourage business leaders, like you don't get to keep people forever, right? This is a pit stop on the road. They're joining this team for a limited amount of time, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5, 10, but they're not with this business forever, right? Do you want to be that person that like, you know, uh, screwed them, milked them, stressed them, for everything they had? Or do you want them to look back at the experience and say, this is where I learned, right? And I'm happy to like reach back and help out whenever, right? Think about the kind of relationship you want people to have with your business after their tenure is done. That's really important. You don't get to keep people forever, but you do get to like make a lasting impression.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it and to recognize the legacy that you leave, good or
Yeah.
bad, wherever it is.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think I've appreciated kind of in this vein is that leaders only know what they know, right?
Mm,
You're only as good as what you have learned and grown and been exposed to.
yeah.
And so there are leaders, and I'll point to myself early in my career. I was not the best leader. Wasn't trained, the first time. And I remember coming back 5 to 7 years later to one of my first employees and just being like, there were some of those situations I really could have handled better. And just acknowledging her experience after my growth of understanding that maybe that wasn't the best way to handle some of those challenges that we were navigating.
Yeah.
And so I always like to remind leaders that you don't have to stick with the way you've always been. Like
Yeah.
you also can expand
Yeah.
beyond where you are, and you have the opportunity to say, "Hey, I didn't appreciate this before, but
Yeah.
now I do, and I
Yeah.
can be different
Yeah.
for the future."
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. I think then that's really spot on because when I think about like when I talk to leaders, some of the biggest gripes is like all I do is work, I don't learn. Right? I don't expand, I don't have those opportunities. But it's also a matter of like, do you see the silver lining in what's happening? And do you intentionally, either like mine the lessons from your experience or do something in your control to expand yourself?
Well, and to your point earlier, if you don't expand the capacity of your team,
Mm,
you will stay limited.
yeah.
If they're dependent on you and you don't grow their capabilities and capacity, then you won't have the ability to expand further because you're at their service.
Yeah.
And so by expanding your team, you actually open up yourself to be able to do more and bigger things.
Yeah. Yeah. 1,000%. Yeah, no, I love this. I love this conversation so much. It's been amazing just kind of reflecting on just entrepreneurship and like at the core of it, like what do we all want? Expansion. We want expansion. We want growth. We want abundance, right? And there's probably 1,000 ways to crack the egg. And what I know to be true is that cracking the egg this way is fun and it's productive and successful. So let's keep making
Well,
these omelets.
and I love that you said that because as humans, that's what we're built to do, right?
Yeah,
Expand and grow and evolve, change in response to our environment and our experiences, whatever they are. And the more that we embrace being works in progress,
yeah,
the less we think about how do we become perfect or how do we achieve some level of some
yeah,
abstractness. The more we just look at it that way, the easier it is to move through both the good times and the challenging times because
yeah.
life's not always, a joyful ride. There's going to
Right.
be those difficult times, and we're just works in progress, kind of growing and expanding in response to all of it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that perspective. I think that's really important to maintain.
Yeah. Well, I've loved having you on as well. I want to give you a chance. Do you have any final thoughts or parting words for our listeners that you want to share today?
Gosh, I think that one of the things that I often ask myself and I ask people in coaching sessions is how would you show up if you were already the best at what you did? What kind of tools would you be using? How would you spend the first 2 hours of your day? Who would you be surrounded by? What kind of problems would you be solving? And I use that as a way of assessing whether or not I'm walking in alignment, with what my truth is. So I'm going to invite everyone listening to just have that moment of pause and ask yourself, how would you show up if you were already the best at what you did?
I that is a beautiful suggestion, and I absolutely love it, and it's so motivating and aligned with helping people to see where they're going
Yeah,
and to feel good. about that path that they're on. Like
Yeah.
this is where I want to be, and this is what I want to be doing. So thank you so much for that, Luis, and thank you for coming on the show today. To all of our listeners, I just want to remind you to always keep evolving, keep growing, keep looking for those opportunities to form new neural pathways, to create new connections so that you can enjoy your life experience, so that you can enjoy more of the experiences on your life journey, and so that one day you can look back on your life and say, I lived my best life, an exceptional life. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be back again with another episode next week.